To help you pick out what to read this year, I'm going to run through some of my favorites. But first, let's take a run through the numbers and see how last year stacked up. 2023 was definitely more than 2022 and less than 2021. This is just summing up the number of pages as I go throughout the year. You can see how the pace stacks up with 2022. As we already know, this fell short of where I ended up in 2021. Another thing I like to do is break down by the fiction, nonfiction. I love in Tableau how you can just hover over these and see what your nonfiction books were that you read this year, what your fiction books were that you read. I've got about a 70-30 split right now. You can see how that compares to the past years. Total for all books read here is the sum at the bottom, about an 80-20 split. If you jump over here to format, you can see that by far the vast majority of my consumption of books, my quote-unquote reading of books, is through audio. I really like Audible. I can listen to it when I'm cleaning, painting, working, driving. It's a fantastic way for me to consume content where my eyes are busy doing something else, especially when I'm listening to something old like Pride and Prejudice or Crime and Punishment. Some of the thicker dialogue is really fun to hear how a professional narrator reads through that. I will say The Martian in particular had an absolutely amazing reader that really added, his voice really added to that story and was perfectly on theme. And of course I can't listen at 1% speed on Audible. I've got to crank it up. Sometimes I start at about 1.25 till I get a feel for the narrator and the story, and then I'll crank it up pretty much as fast as I'm comfortable. For me, that's about 1.5, somewhere between 1.5 and 2. Interested on people's thoughts, go ahead and comment below on listening versus reading. This year we've got quite an uptick in the paper category, and this is primarily just me reading with my son. We started getting pretty consistent each night and just reading a little bit. So we ended up reading quite a few books together, which was a lot of fun, including an ebook as well. So I've got about an 80-20 split on the listening versus the reading. I really like this one called A Tree Map. You can see fantasy, again, takes up the bulk of the reading. And so when you think of fantasy, this is like Harry Potter's and Chronicles of Narnia, typical books like that. And then I do break out science fiction. History is my other favorite. As you can see, that's the other largest percentage. I really enjoy reading through history, and there were some fantastic ones this year. Now it's fun to just look at overall page length. So the way this works is every single one of these is a title that I've read, and then you can see it's just the number of pages along the bottom. I've done a cutoff. If you're less than 80 pages, I didn't count it as a book. Then it runs all the way up to the book that I read this year, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Fantastic book, absolute beast in terms of length. What's fun to look at with this one is you can see if I just select the 2023s, you can see how I'm reading those. And if I select another one, say a 2013, that's when I know that a lot of the reading was pulling up my overall median towards the top. Another fun thing to look at this chart is what are some of those really big whoppers, and of course that was The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, but you also have James Michener's Texas, Les Mis, which I watched very recently in the Broadway for the second time, which is just absolutely phenomenal. Victor Hugo is a genius. The people who ran the Broadway play did a fantastic job in really connecting his message and making it fun with a modern audience. So some of the big ones: Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, Stephen King's The Stand. Oh, I do have Alaska written in here. Oh, Texas is a big one. Brandon Sanderson coming in here strong with Oathbringer. That's just kind of fun. Big pile up of the books. And I think this view is kind of cool. Perhaps a more efficient way of seeing that is with a box and whisker plot. 50% of the data in between 288 pages all the way up to 904, with the median of 400 pages. Everything above this upper whisker is considered an outlier relative to that data. It's fun to see it broken down year by year. Again, I like this. Here's that total that we just looked at, but you can see 2013 was a year that I read a lot of the Brandon Sanderson books and some other large books, and so it pulled that entire median up to 780 pages per book, whereas this year I'm closer to 400 pages per book. Let's take a look at the authors. You've got your real big hitters, of course, like Brandon Sanderson, Jim Butcher with his Dresden Files, and Codex Alera, which I have not finished all of, but I would like to. Robert Jordan, of course, with his Wheel of Time. J.K. Rowling with the Harry Potter, and they get double counted in here because I like to record when I read it again, and so I've read them twice. So in this view, they're double counted. Neil Stephenson, phenomenal author, very intellectual material. I learned a lot from Neil Stephenson. Brandon Mull, really, quite a few pages with Brandon Mull, and highly encourage checking that out. And then when you get into the history section, Walter Isaacson, absolutely my favorite history writer. My goal is to read everything that Walter Isaacson writes, and so I'm excited. This year he wrote one that people tell me is really good on Elon Musk, so I'm interested in checking that one out. In terms of history authors, right after Walter Isaacson is David McCullough. David McCullough is the other one that I enjoy from a history perspective. And then of course we've got Orson Scott Card coming in strong on the science fiction. By page count, here are my biggest authors. If I just go to 2023, here are my biggest authors. All right, the piece that maybe you've been waiting for all year, might you be interested in them? Hopefully by this point you're familiar with the Princess Bride movie. If you're not, stop whatever you're doing and go watch it. It is an absolute fantastic adventure. And I still have yet to read the book, although it is sitting on my bookshelf and I should read it. What I did read was the book by the lead actor, Wesley, in The Princess Bride. And that's not only a fantastic name, but it was also a fantastic book narrated by him himself. That's another great one to listen to, is when the author themselves does that. Really recommend Dave Grohl, the drummer for Nirvana / lead of the Foo Fighters. Some of those are really great when you have a chance. Talk about this next year, but Ali Abdaal read his own book, Feel Good Productivity, that he just came out with. It's always great to hear directly from them, and this one is no exception. We have Carrie Elwes. Hopefully I'm saying that right. As You Wish, Inconceivable Tales from the Making of the Princess Bride, a behind-the-scenes look. It's another way of coming in and revisiting a fun universe. I mentioned this one a few times, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. I held off on reading this one. Frankly, I don't really like this period very much because it kind of drags me down, the Holocaust and other things. But I did go to Washington, D.C. this year for the first time, and we went to the Holocaust Museum, which was absolutely fantastic. Really a place of consideration and thoughtfulness, and really making sure that we don't forget the past and we're mindful of the future, and just a really almost a holy place. It felt really peaceful there at the end to be able to think about the victims of that time period. That's what prompted me to start reading this book. What I found actually was the book wasn't really focused on that at all. And by the time I got to the chapters that did deal with the atrocities of Hitler's regime, I was kind of ready for it and ready to see, a little bit more in depth what actually went on with, statistics and understand it better. But by far the book is about the political rise of Hitler to that station. How did he get into position? How did that even happen? How did he stay in power? And how did he come out of power? Can't recommend it enough. A great read for that period. I also recommend, didn't read those this year, but the ones by William Manchester on Winston Churchill, those 3 volumes to see it from a UK perspective. Besides the coin that I really enjoyed. Washington Life. I had read David McCullough's John Adams and also his 1776. I thought that I was going to get to read a lot about Washington in 1776. Really, 1776, I loved it. There just wasn't enough of it. It felt like the leftover notes from his John Adams book. And so finally I was able to revisit Washington, A Life, handled brilliantly by Ron Chernow, who of course wrote a Hamilton book, which is the basis of the amazing Broadway play. Washington, A Life, I felt like Washington was an enigma. It's no surprise that I felt that way. Many people felt that way, even at the time, his contemporaries. And I just thought, why does everyone love Washington so much? And I was able to finally understand in this book. So if you'd like to understand too, I highly recommend it. And frankly, I thought it was an easier read than Hamilton's. Really enjoyed American Sniper. I'm told the next book that I need to read is Lone Survivor, so I'm excited to do that. Prisoners of Geography, 10 maps that tell you everything you need to know about global politics. Really, really interesting book. First of all, I love brief histories of things over time anyway, because it gives me this higher level view. And then this one had that unique perspective of how much geography has affected geopolitics and continues to affect geopolitics. And spoiler alert, it's a lot. 5 stars is I loved it. 4 stars is really good. So don't think just because I've taken a slightly lower rating that it wasn't. I try to differentiate between my scores. I didn't this year because there were just so many 5s. This has to be the most 5s I've ever given in a single year, which is great. And I try really hard to get books that I'm going to enjoy. But 4s are really good, and 3s are good. So 3 is I still was good. 2s I didn't like it, and 1 is hated it. Obviously, the biggest contributor here was J.K. Rowling. Amazing books. Absolutely need to read these books. If you haven't, highly encourage you to go out and do it. If you've tried them before and didn't quite get into it, but you've watched the movies, I recommend jumping straight to the 4th one. You'll be able to get enough from the movies from the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. But jump in and read them. They're just amazing books. You'll really enjoy them. It's just a fantastic read. There's a reason that so many people have read these books. And I read them this year because my son finished them this year, and I promised him and my daughter that once they'd both read them all, we would go to Universal Studios in Florida and visit the wonderful wizarding world of Harry Potter, which we did and was fantastic. In fact, if you haven't subscribed yet, I highly recommend that you do. I've got a video coming up where I built a small Hagrid's hut, which was inspired, of course, by the world of J.K. Rowling. If you haven't had a chance, subscribe so that you don't miss that upcoming video. That's what I'm hoping to put out next. The other block that I read here was The Three Brandon Moles, finishing out his Dragonwatch series. This is a follow-on to the very popular Fablehaven series with Seth and Kendra, where they visit a magical preserve full of wonderful, scary, and beautiful, enchanting creatures all at once. The next series of 5 books follows their adventures at another preserve, largely filled with dragons, and I'll say it's probably pegged at a little bit older reading level than Fablehaven. I was like okay with book 1 and 2, and I hadn't finished them out. I read these with my son this year. They really jumped out to me. I've really connected a lot with these, and if you're familiar with the Fablehaven ones, Seth in particular has some really interesting challenges, some real obstacles that he needs to work on overcoming in these books. If you're a fan of Brandon Mole, then I highly recommend the Dragonwatch is definitely worth reading that 2nd series. If you've never read Brandon Mole, then I recommend. He's got some fantastic series out there that are probably targeted at kids and teens, but are also very enjoyable for adults as well. So I recommend starting with Fablehaven. He has a Candy Shop Wars. He has a series called The Beyonders. All those are great places to start for reading Brandon Mole, who I've met at a book signing a couple times. Went to a launch event when my wife was teaching. Actually, she had her whole room themed in Fablehaven. She had Fablehaven money, and she rewarded her students with Fablehaven money that they could get certain prizes or privileges with. That was their big incentive during the school. So this is a 2nd reading. I wrote 2nd reading. I think it's actually my 3rd reading, but of the writer. This is just a fun, quick story to pull out. Got princesses and princes and brigands, and it's just a very fun little story with mixing and matching some of the traditional roles of the characters, and it'll feel at once familiar and also it's a new story. Edgar Rice Burroughs is the author of the original Tarzan book and subsequent books. Tarzan was a huge hero of my dad's. In fact, just as Tarzan swung through ropes or vines in the jungle, my dad would put up rope swings. So I grew up at a very young age climbing ropes and swinging out of the trees with my siblings. Something that we did all the time, and I really enjoyed that, and frankly it helped me develop a lot of great muscle when I was a kid. But these have very sort of Pulp Fiction-y covers to them too as well. Looking through titles in the library, these ones jumped right out at me to read, and I really enjoyed these. So he wrote all these Tarzan books, but he also wrote other series as well. One of them you may be familiar with is the Princess of Mars, which they named John Carter when they did the movie of that book. So he's read a few things. The writer's a fun little one, and there's a fantastic one that I guarantee none of you have read. If you have, let me know, called Norman of Torn. And this one is, again, in the same sort of vein of the writer, but it's a longer book. And if you want to read a really cool book about with knights and horses and chivalry, that's just a great book where you'll find that. Mike Thayer, cannot say enough about Mike Thayer. He is a fantastic author and happens to be a personal friend of mine. But don't think that that's biasing me. His books are doing fantastic. He's writing the Techno Wizard. Mike, we're still waiting for the 4th and 5th Techno Wizard book. I get frequent requests from my son for those two, but I know why you paused. You got picked up. Theron has written a couple of outstanding books. Danny Doubleday is probably where I'd say jump in right now and read Danny Doubleday, about a boy who the ability to live the same day twice. And this year's installment, it was The Talent Thief, about a girl who can take anyone's talent for a short period of time. These are just wonderful what ifs. He just writes really funny, interesting stories. Go get Danny Doubleday. Start with that one. If you read Danny Doubleday, grab The Talent Thief. A couple of fun ones. If you've read both of those, then go read The Techno Wizard, and then tell Mike to write the fourth and fifth one. Chronicles of Narnia. This is one of those books that's just like such a part of our culture, and yet I've never read the whole series. So I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe years ago, and I can't remember if I started any of the others or not. I don't think so. My son and I decided to tackle them, and we've read the first, second, third, and fourth. We're reading them not in the order that they were published, but in the order recommended by C.S. Lewis. And in fact, my favorite one is the very first one. I think his writing is sharper and more interesting. We're also excited to learn that Greta Gerwig, who did Lady Bird, Little Women, Barbie, I think she's working on the upcoming Snow White, has announced that she'll be doing at least two of the Chronicles of Narnia books. So we're excited. Science fiction, Children of Time. This one is pure core science fiction, very hard science fiction. Makes us ask interesting questions of ourselves as a species. This one projects us out in time at a much later date in the human existence, but it follows a very logical chain of events that could happen and asks some interesting questions with it. I don't really want to give this one away, just know that it got a 5. And while obviously I hand 5s out like candy this year, this one deserved it. Nemesis Games, if you haven't read the Expanse novels, this is based on the first one's Leviathan Wakes. They made the popular TV series The Expanse out of it. These ones are hard science fiction as well. We've spread out as a human race and colonized not just Mars and other planets throughout several parts of the solar system, politics and wars and encounters with the other that occurs in these books. There's quite a few more of these. I'm excited to continue reading them. I just kind of pick one up each year and read it. They continue to deliver an outstanding performance, and this one was no exception. So, Nemesis Games. Storyworthy by Matthew Dix. This was a recommendation by popular YouTuber Ali Abdaal, and now author of the Feel Good Productivity that I really enjoy. But he recommended Storyworthy, and Matthew Dix, obviously a master storyteller, was great to hear his view of how to tell stories and to pick up some skills and things that I can roll in when I'm communicating and telling my stories, whether it be on YouTube or in business or just communicating with others. If I could take in a fraction of the things that he has to tell, I would be a much more compelling person to listen to. Okay, Eye of the Needle by Ken Follett. It could be tagged as thriller, it could be tagged as historical fiction. It was just a really great book about a spy that's infiltrated the UK, worked for Hitler. It's just a really edge of your seat story that it delivers. A little bit of content warning. Really enjoyed that book. Science, Life 3.0. I think I saw a list of like books on Elon Musk's to read list or something, so I checked it out. I was looking for a more positive view of AI and the impacts that AI can have on our future. There's a lot of doom and gloom about it, and justifiably so, I think. At least raises some real concerns that we need to think through. I've had some really positive interactions so far with AI. I'm working on a programming project. Again, you'll want to subscribe to see that one coming out. It's really cool. But I'm using AI. It's helping me program and do things that I wouldn't be able to do nearly as fast. I can put in the guidance, and all of a sudden the code will come out, and I'm learning as I do it and brainstorming ideas. So it's been positive for me. But this book really extends out about the implications of AI and the key questions, and really does a fair treatise of the topic. The big focus is on, okay, how do we bring about the benefits while making sure that some of the really doom and gloom potential scenarios of AI don't come about. Closing out with an actual thriller. Like I've said before, this is just the continuation of the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series. I've enjoyed that series, although a little bit of content in those books as well. So what's next for me? I've already read one, Feel Good Productivity, And then I've got Defiant, which is the 4th book in the Skyward series by Brandon Sanderson. I am also going to read Almost Surely Dead. My wife tells me that I absolutely have to read that one. I'm reading Radical Candor as a business book and discussing that as a leadership team. And I mentioned I'll be reading Elon Musk by Walter Isaacson. That one's on the list. That's not 28 books, and as we know, that's about my average. What do you recommend? Please put it down in the comments. It's fun to pull a character right off the pages of a book. And that's what we do with one of the characters in Brandon Mole's book right here in this video.